Alright, today guys, need some help relaxing, so I'm drinking Tea Pig's Lazy Days lemon and ginger tea. So anyway, I had planned on doing quarterly wrap-ups because I'm kind of a slow reader, and I didn't think monthly I'd have enough to talk about, but then, beginning of the year here, I actually kind of read a lot, so this might be too much. Let's get right to it. Alright, so first up, I'm just going to skim through a couple books I've talked about in other videos, or we'll be talking about in upcoming videos, so you don't have to hear about them again. Just check them linked either in the cards or in the description. It depends on how many I have. First is Starless Sea. I read it in January. 5-star book. Amazing. I did a review for it. Then following books. The Paris Wife was 2 stars. Map of Lost Memories, 4 stars. The Haunting of Maddie Claire, 5 stars. Cocoa Beach, 2 stars, and Lost Among the Living were 3 stars. Those were for my Roaring Twenties themed reading challenge, so check those out if you're interested in hearing more about those. I read all 6 volumes of Lock and Key in February, and I rated them all very highly in order that's 5, 4, 5, 5, 5, and 5 stars. I loved them all. Didn't care for the Netflix show, so check both of those videos out if you haven't already. And then finally, the Racine Chronicles. I haven't uploaded that review yet, but it's recorded and just waiting. I read the first one last year. I bought the first 4 volumes at Jordan Con. And in order, I gave those books 3, 3, 4, and 4 stars. I won't dwell on them, but again, I'll have a video out for them soon. Going month by month, in January, I read 8 books with an average page count of 395 pages. And an average rating of 3.5 stars. No 1-star reads in January, so that's good at least. The Paris Wife was my only 2-star, so out of the way. There were 4 3-star books I read, so one was Orbs of Azure from the Racine Chronicles. So after that we have The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. This, if you don't already know what it's about, is about an alternative London that's full of magic, and every human has a daemon, which is like a companion they have that takes the form of animals, and when you're a child it can shapeshift and change into any animal, but somewhere around puberty, it's implied, I think it's puberty, it chooses a form that it stays in for the rest of its life, and that form it chooses is supposed to say something about you, I think. Like servants all have like a specific kind and things like that. It's first book of his Infernal Devices, and it wasn't bad. I think I just was super disappointed. It was just really overhyped. I'd had so many people recommend it to me, and then to just kind of think it was okay wasn't what I was expecting. I liked the beginning of it. I really enjoyed the exploring of London. I liked the fun shenanigans. I liked the intrigue of what's going on with her uncle and everything else like that. But somewhere around the time she starts traveling with the Egyptians, I just kind of lost interest. It got boring and repetitive and wasn't going anywhere. I also gotta say, I listened to it on audiobook and most of it was good, but whoever voiced Lyra was so grating, and that didn't help my experience at all. So Catch-22 was another one. This is a historical fiction and classic. It's about a World War II pilot. I had read this in high school and loved it. It was like a summer read for my AP class. So I thought I would reread it. I watched the Hulu series last year with my little brother, and I liked that. I remember it reminding me of the TV show MASH, which I absolutely love because it's got this kind of absurdist humor and this kind of stream of consciousness and just really out there wild thing. Rereading it now. One, I did it as audiobook, which I thought would make it better because it's got this stream of consciousness thing going. I figured, that would be a positive thing for this kind of style, but then the audiobook just made it more confusing. But worse than that, it's just a little too much a product of the time. A lot of casual racism, a lot of casual misogyny. It just couldn't quite get past that. There are still some really good moments, and there's still some really good commentary in there, so I still think it's probably worth the read if you can stomach the problems that it has, but man, it was tough to get past. And the last 3-star book I read in January was Beauty and the Werewolf by Mercedes Lackey. This is a fairy tale retelling. It's a little bit of Little Red Riding Hood, a little bit of Beauty and the Beast. I was expecting it to be shallow, and it was, but it had a surprising amount of depth to it. So I liked it. It took some time to get into it. I'd love to read more in the world, but it was just okay. The only 4-star book for me in January was The Princess Bride. It was really, really good. Okay, if you don't already know what The Princess Bride is, just watch the movie. But it's a kind of spoof on a fairy tale. The princess and the gallant knight, and I don't know. For me, I think it disappointed me almost because it was so similar to the movie. Like, when I read a book that I've already watched an adaptation of, I expect to get something more out of it, and I just didn't get that from The Princess Bride. Which feels like it should be a compliment to the movie, not an insult to the book. It should be like, wow, that movie did a really good job adapting this book. But I think the issue there came in that, like, a lot of stuff that worked in the movie, in my opinion, like a lot of the dialogue came off real weird in the book. That said, it was still really good, really enjoyable. It just didn't quite hit that 5-star mark for me because of that disappointment, if that made any sense whatsoever. And finally, in January, I had 2 5-star books. One was Starless Sea, which, again, check the review if you haven't seen that. And then the other was Ella Enchanted. So Ella Enchanted, unlike Princess Bride, was totally different from the movie. So Ella Enchanted, whether you've seen the movie or not, it's a Cinderella retelling, but it's actually a really subtle Cinderella retelling about a girl who, as a baby, is cursed to always obey. It's a fairy that's kind of insane and gives everybody gifts, but they're really terrible. I loved it. It did that retelling in a way that was really, really subtle. And it just had a really beautiful, slow but sweet romance between 2 characters that very clearly cared about each other. It was well done, and Ella is a great protagonist, and I don't know, I still love the movie. I'm never going to stop loving the movie, but I really think this is one of those cases where I enjoy them as 2 very separate entities, and that is fine. Moving on to February, I read a whopping 16 books, so this is where I kind of set the curve off. There was an average of 3.9 stars and an average page count of 283, so that lower page count probably explains the higher book count. The only 1-star book I had this month was a DNF. It was The Lonely Hearts Hotel by Heather O'Neill. Lord, I hated this book. So the synopsis, when I was picking up the book, I was looking for another book and this was recommended and I was like, sure, I'll give it a shot, And God, I hated it. The synopsis is like these 2 orphans that fall in love while they're in the orphanage together, but then they get separated and they find their way back to each other. So I was expecting a really sweet, light love story, maybe a little bit of some sadness in there insofar as orphanages and stuff like that tend to come with sadness. It was not sweet or cute at all. It was just dark and gloomy, and it was like torture porn, but without a purpose. It was awful. I don't know if I want to get into it because there's definitely some heavy triggers in it, and let me rant about this for a minute. All right, trigger warning for rape is specifically statutory rape, and drug use, and then spoiler warnings for this book if you have a desire to read this book. So this book was just awful. Anyway, rant over. Point being, this book was awful, and if all of that stuff I ranted about wasn't good enough or seemed intriguing to you, these characters also never grow up. The time I stopped at like halfway, and they're like in their early 20s, and they're still acting like 8-year-olds. Like, Rose is doing like cartwheels and falling on her butt, and people are laughing, and it's like, ha 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 ha, isn't that quirky and cute? And it's like, yeah, it was quirky and cute when she was 8. It's not when she's 23. Alright, point is, I hated it. If you've read this book and like it, please try to explain it to me in the comments, because I read the 5-star reviews on this, and they were all like, wow, I loved this, it was so deep. And I even like read spoilers up till the end, and I'm like, I don't like any of this. I'm moving on. I need to move on. The only 2-star I read this month was Cocoa Beach. Check out my 1920s. For 3 stars, I had 3 books. One of those was Lost Among the Living. The other was The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. This is a young adult romance about a girl and a boy that spend a day together and fall in love, but she gets deported at the end of the day is the big thing going on. It was cute. It was sweet. I think the issue for me was just that it was so unrealistic. These were like 17, 18-year-old kids, and I just found it so hard to believe. I think I'm just really jaded. I don't know. But it was cute. It was cute enough that I picked up another Yoon book later. And the other 3-star for me was The Sorcerer's Stone, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Philosopher's Stone, whichever. I don't really have much to say about it. You guys know the story. It was an okay book. I figured I'd do a reread of Harry Potter because it's been getting a lot of attention now that, like, people are like, oh my god, it's so bad. Why do people like Harry Potter? And it's like, are people being jaded because they're old now? And, you know, there's that whole hate everything from your childhood when you get older. Is it genuinely bad? Is it just anger at J.K. Rowling for being awful? So I wanted to read them, and I specifically wanted to read them in audiobook because I've heard the audiobook's really, really good, and I'll put on the screen specifically which narrator because I think there's 2. I wasn't impressed by the audiobook at all. He makes every single one of the professors at Hogwarts sound exactly the same with the same shrill, like, stereotypical, like, adult voice. It was, the audiobook wasn't great. But, I mean, the book is the book. It's cute. It's not great. Alright, and then February 4-star books. And the first was Pearl of Emerald. Again, check out that video when it comes out. There was also Head Games. That's the 2nd volume of Lock and Key, so check out that review. And finally, The Map of Lost Memories. Again, have a video for that. The only other 4-star I read was Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon, and I'm glad I picked this up because I liked it a lot more. So this is another young adult romance, but this one is about a girl with a very severe immunodeficiency syndrome, and she has to stay inside all the time. And then this boy moves in next door, and they start, like, emailing and stuff. And it's cute, and I like this one a lot more. Mostly because, well, 2 things. One, I found it more believable, because this is a girl that, like, has never been outside before, so her falling in love with the first boy to talk to her is believable. The other thing is also this book had a much heavier focus on the relationship between, and I don't remember anybody's names, but the main girl and her mom was a bigger focus to me than the relationship between the girl and the boy. So I really enjoyed that part of it a lot more. Yeah, it was good. Cute. If you're gonna choose between the 2 of them, I would go for Everything Everything, but that's in my opinion. Alright, so 5-star books. I had a lot of 5-star books this month. There were the 5 other volumes of Lock and Key were all 5 stars. The Haunting of Maddie Clare was a 5-star. And the final one was Middle Game by Shannon. It occurs to me that I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce her name, but I think it's Shannon Mcguire. Excuse me. And I've been wanting to read Shauna Mcguire since I finished the JordanCon anthology from 2019, because of all of the short stories in that, Shauna Mcguire's was the only one I gave 5 stars to, so I've been waiting. And then, on top of it, like, Books and Lala talks up Middle Game so much, so I picked this up as an audiobook to read on a drive home or whatever. It's indescribable. I couldn't even tell you what this book is about. Like, you could read the synopsis of this book and still have no idea what this book is about. It's about an alchemist trying to figure out how to get to the impossible city, which is like an analogy for any sort of mythical, goal-oriented city. It's Avalon, El Dorado, Oz, that kind of thing. Oh my god, it was just so weird, and I loved it. Like, listening to it on audiobook was probably twice as confusing as it would have been reading, and if I had been reading it, I would have been flipping back and forth, like, all the time. To be like, oh my god, did I pick up on that, and where are we at this point? So in some ways, I'm glad I had the audiobook, because it would have taken me forever to finish this book. And it was just so confusing, and I had no idea what was happening, like, ever, and I loved it. Like, I finished the book with this sense of, like, there is something deeper here, and I'm just not getting it, and I love that feeling. So if that feeling's not for you, maybe this isn't the book for you, but I loved it, and it started me down a Sheena Mcguire rabbit hole that I am going to find the bottom of, because I'm loving it. And into March. So I finished 9 books in March, average page count of 341, average rating of 3.9 out of 5 stars. So I did have one DNF in March. This is where we finally get to the books I have. I finally put down Senlin Ascends. So I got this arc of Senlin Ascends at Jordan Con last year. Oh, that's blocking my light. We'll put it on this side. And I didn't really know what it was about or anything, but I put it on my bookshelf to eventually read, and I figured I'd pick it up. And I got, I don't know, just shy of halfway through it. It's not that I didn't like it. Oh, it's by Josiah Bancroft. I should have mentioned that. This book, here, let me show you the spine, which actually shows you anything about it. It's not that I didn't like it. It's just that whenever I went to go grab a book to read, I was never picking up this one. This was never the book I picked up. So that was part of it. And it just meant it was taking me so long. I'm like halfway through it, and that was like 2 months worth of work. I just had other stuff I wanted to read more, and so this is about the Tower of Babel. There's this world. I haven't quite figured out if it's supposed to be our world, but with the Tower of Babel in it, or if it's its own world. But this man, Senlin, goes on his honeymoon with his wife to the Tower of Babel, and he's a teacher or professor, and he's been talking about how great this is. It's like the paragon of humanity. And he goes with his wife, and his wife disappears on their first day, and so it's him slowly climbing up the tower to try to find his wife, and finding out that this tower isn't quite as great as he'd always thought it was. Conceptually, I like it. I like the story that I read so far. It just wasn't working for me. I think part of my problem is that it's all in one perspective, and I'm learning that that might not be something I like. I do really well, at least in fantasy. In fantasy, I love multi-perspective, unless it's going to be short, like the Tenserate series, which is my favorite read of 2019, was the Tenserate saga. That's all one. Each of those books is one perspective, but they're relatively short. This is an awfully thick book to get through for me for just one perspective. So I'll probably pick it back up at some point, but for right now, I had to put it down. Probably should have said that I didn't actually rate it, because I don't like rating books that I don't hate when I put them down. So anyway, it didn't have any 1-star books. My only 2-star book was The Girls of the Atomic City by Denise. I listened to this one with my boyfriend since we're both working from home now. It was really convenient to put on an audiobook while we were working. Ugh, it's not what I expected or what I wanted. So this is a narrative nonfiction about some of the people that were working on the atomic bomb, some of them knowing that's what they were working on, but many of them kept in the dark. The key word here that I did not notice when I picked this book up was narrative. I was expecting some historical context. I was expecting some interesting thing about what consequences were for talking about this, or what kind of security measures there were. I was expecting some maybe personal anecdotes thrown in. I was expecting some deep science on like how the bomb was built, a little bit anyway. And that's not what this is. This was a story about relationship drama. It's about a girl deciding whether or not to date her boss. It was very personal and drama filled, and was just happened to be set to the backdrop of the city where they were building the bomb. I had to check multiple times to remind myself that this was a nonfiction and not just a historical fiction. So this is definitely for a lot of people. It just wasn't for me. So I had 2 3-star books. One was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, continuing my Harry Potter reread. This is honestly one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Harry Potter book. Probably second favorite. I think book 6 is Half-Blood Prince is probably my favorite. But the rating doesn't really reflect it. It does a lot of introducing concepts that come up later, which is really important to do, but it ends up feeling like that those things were just thrown in for the convenience. And that's fine. Me knowing that they come up later in the story makes me kind of able to ignore those this early. The problem is at the end, when we get to the climax, and suddenly there is a bunch of stuff thrown in that only matters for this book and was only put in to solve problems in this book. That's when I started having issues. Like, spoilers for this if you haven't already read Chamber of Secrets or watched the movie. But there's about a dozen contrived plot devices in the last, chapter or 2 of the book. Like, oh my gosh, the Sorting Hat can summon magical items? I know we've never done this before and don't really do it again, but it can happen. And Phoenix Tears can heal. I mean, this totally could have been brought up when, we introduced the Phoenix early in their story, but no, we're only going to throw it in when it's necessary. And by the way, this Phoenix can totally fly and carry for mostly grown people. The last one in particular annoys me because there has to have been another way she could have solved this. I mean, Ginny was getting into and out of the chamber, right? Tom Riddle used to be able to get into and out of the chamber, right? No reason there couldn't have been another exit to the Chamber of Secrets. Anyway, so, could have been a 4-star, ending made it a 3-star. The other 3-star read this month was The Lady Rogue by Jen Bennet. This falls very clearly into the good but not great category for me. Main complaint I have about it is just that the time period was very incidental. It didn't really play a role in the story besides maybe social convention a little bit. For most of the book, I completely forgot it took place in 1938, 39, whenever it was. If it weren't for the lack of technology, I could have very easily believed this was just a modern day story. The time period didn't seem to matter or play any sort of role. But, I mean, other than that, it was a pretty cute story. The romance won me over despite of myself. I was like, no, this is kind of dumb. But they actually did a really good job, immediately when Hux was immediately when Hux entered the scene, you could already feel that there was, some sort of history between the two characters. So it was well written, it was cute. The mystery element was fun to follow, it was fun to try to puzzle out yourself, and the magic elements were few and far between, but neat. So overall, pretty good. I also didn't care for the ending of this one, but it was a 3-star book, a very solid 3-star book. I had 2 4-star books. I gotta stop doing that, because it just looks like 2. I had two 4-star books this month. One was Phoenix of Scarlet, which is book 4 of the Racine Chronicles. And then the other was The Bees by Laylene Paul. I have no idea how to describe this book to you. Not this book, put it down. I have no idea how to talk about the bees. The synopsis says it's a dystopian. They say it's somewhere between Hunger Games and the Margaret Atwood one that I can't think of the name of. Anyway, and I don't really know if that's an accurate description of this. If you read through the comments, you'll find a lot of people that were just as confused as I was about, is this supposed to be a dystopian where there's, humanoid creatures that just happen to be lots very similar to bees, and they're using this like bee-style hierarchy to make a point and make it a dystopian, or what? And I think that's a pretty good summation of where the confusion of this series comes in, because I think I would have liked it a lot more. 4 stars already means I really liked it, but I think I would have loved it if that was the choice that was made. But these were literal bees. Like, literal bees in our world doing things real bees do in our world. There were humans at some point, there was a city, there were cars. Like, these were real bees that just happened to have be slightly personified. And I mean very slightly personified. And I don't know. It was amazing. I don't know what I think the thing that confused me, though, is I just don't get the point. Like, if it was supposed to be dystopian, I'm really not sure what the dystopian aspect of this is. I mean, like, undoubtedly, I would not want to live in this beehive, but, like, I'm not a bee, and I'm well aware that bees don't really have personalities, so, like, is this just, like, anti-bee story? Is it supposed to be, like, anti-bee farming? I don't know. Or is it supposed to be, like, a dystopian that's supposed to be, like, anti-religious rule? I really have no idea what Laylene Paul was trying to get out of this story, but I enjoyed reading it nonetheless. And finally, for March, I had 3 5-star books. One was a graphic novel called On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. This was just a really cute sci-fi romance. It follows 2 timelines. One is the protagonist, Mia, in the past as, like, a schoolgirl, and she meets this other girl, and it's kind of their budding romance. It's very cute. And then the other one is Mia in the modern day, or the present for the story, and she's working with an intergalactic construction crew. And of course, those storylines somehow mesh later on down the road, and it's just adorable. And I enjoyed it because it was simple and cute, but I guess there is a much deeper meaning to be found if you look into, like, the metaphor of the colors chosen and the way the artwork is depicted, which I did not, because I don't do that unless it's, like, bam in my face. But if you're looking for something a little deeper, it's there too. And I loved it. It was adorable. The next 5-star was The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Haley Rubenhold. Rubenhold. I mean, the title tells you what it's about. It's a nonfiction, another one I've read on audiobook with my boyfriend, and it explores the lives of the 5 women that were killed by Jack the Ripper, but it focuses on, like, who they really were, and what their lives were like, and what was their daily lives, and then on top of that, where were they when they were killed, and why did this make them victims to Jack the Ripper. And the point about this is, like, just, it's a commentary on, like, the interest people take in serial killers and why they take that interest, and why they're willing to, like, is specifically for Jack the Ripper, why they're so willing to turn him into this, like, anti-hero at the expense of his victims, where we just have this minced information about his victims largely due to the, like, media of the time period, but also because, like, we would rather believe that because it makes a more interesting story. And it was just really cool, even for, like, the social commentary was super cool. If you're interested in Jack the Ripper, read this, because I think it's fascinating. If you are really into 18th century, or late 19th century, late 19th century England, read this, because this was a fascinating study on the time period and the lives of specifically middle to lower income, or middle to lower class women in 19th century England. It also had surprising commentary on sex work during the time period. I really, really enjoyed this. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, though, so, take what I say with a grain of salt, but I really think this is a wonderful read for literally anyone. Also, as a side note on that, because I did it on audiobook, that narrator was so good. I'm not sure if it was Rubenhold that did the audio narration for it, but it was really well done. The pacing of it, very good. And then finally, my last 5-star book for this month was Dusk or Dark or Dawn or Day by Sheena Mcguire. So, like I said, I'm starting down the Sheena Mcguire rabbit hole. This is it's about a ghost that's trying to, like, atone for her life by doing good deeds, specifically by working in a suicide prevention hotline. And that's just really not a good description of this book, because that's basically what the synopsis on it says, and it made me think, oh, I'm getting into one of those typical, like, guardian angels, gotta do 2 good deeds to get into heaven or whatever kind of stories. And I picked it up just because it was Sheena Mcguire, and I should just trust her because this was amazing. It was just way more complex than that. It's not just the atoning angel kind of story. Like, it's very complex. I mean, and it's relatively short, but in that time period, it builds a really interesting world with really fascinating rules for what it means to be a ghost and what it means to be a witch or other beings that are in that world. And it was just surprisingly complex and deep, and I loved it. So there you go. Sheena Mcguire might be my new favorite author. So I'm going to talk about what I'm currently reading while my, like, yearly stats thus far come up on the screen so you can stop staring at my face. I'm still reading Fires of Heaven with my partner, and I'm also still trucking my way through Die Suche nach dem Auge der Welt on my own. If you checked out my Magical Readathon TBR, I'm gonna try to get through it this month. We'll see what happens. I'm reading Welcome to Bordertown as my short story collection right now. I'm reading it less now because I'm working from home, so, like, I'm listening to audiobooks while I work, not, like, taking 5 minutes between classes to read that so much. So we're going slowly through it, but I am liking it, and I'm thinking that, like, what makes me like this more as a collection of short stories is that all of the stories are much more, what's the word? They're much more connected. They all have something in common. It's not like, as much as I liked the Jordan Kahn anthology, which is the last anthology I read, those stories didn't really have anything in common. They were just a collection of sci-fi and fantasy short stories. That's not giving me much. These are very specifically urban fantasy stories that all take place in the same setting and have similar, even though each one has its own main character, the background characters are all the same. So I'm liking that style of anthology. So if you have recommendations for similar ones, I know there's the whole Borderland series, or Bordertown series. Other than that, though, if you have recommendations for similar ones, please let me know. Specifically ones that have different authors, because I like reading short stories as a way to introduce myself to new authors. So if it's, like, a short story collection all by George R.R. Martin, that's not the most useful for me. But anyway, please give me anthology recommendations. Moving on. I am reading The Stand by Stephen King, but I borrowed the audiobook via Libby, and it went back to the library when I was at 50%, and it's going to be like 2 more months before I get it back, so that's kind of on hiatus. Thoughts so far? I liked the beginning. I liked the, like, first quarter of it when it was about the infection spreading. Now that we're into, like, how do humans react to an empty world post-pandemic world, I am liking it less. This is probably not the best time in the world to be reading it, but I can separate the fiction and the facts fine. But I'm just not as into it. My partner and I just started Someone Who Will Love You in All of Your Messed Up Glory by the producer of BoJack Horseman. It's interesting. And finally, I am reading Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I was supposed to finish this by March, but I'm recording this on April 1st, and I am not done. I'm about halfway through it, but like I talked about with Senlin Ascends, the single point of view thing, it's rough for me. I just get bored of being in somebody's head for that long. I'm reading it on Your Cloud Library, and if anybody uses that app, the appearance of it, the format of it, just makes reading ebooks hard for me, like, harder than it already was for me to read ebooks. And also, like, it's a coming-of-age story. We get to see Fitz grow up, and it's incredibly slow. There are occasionally points where I'm like, man, I'm super into this, and I'll read, like, 3-4 chapters in a row, but more often than not, I end up a little bit stuck, and I will, like, read a couple pages, put it down, and not pick it up for 3 days. So I'm getting through it very slowly. Overall, I'm liking it. I'm just not devouring it. And well, anyway, that's where I'm at, guys. And that's everything for now. Bye.